Hey guys, Joe Miles here with Osseo Gear. This is the Mission Whitetail podcast. We're going to be doing a deep dive into what it truly takes to kill these mature bucks. We're going to step outside the box and look at the why for gear, tactics, training, and more importantly, the mindset from over 35 years of chasing these magnificent animals all over North America. Thank you for following along and welcome to Mission Whitetail. All right, guys, welcome back, Mission Whitetail. This is episode 100, a major benchmark for Mission Whitetail. So excited about that, and we were all doing a little round table about who we ought to try to reach out to and get on episode 100. And the name that kept coming to the top of the list was none other than Mr. Don Higgins. So we've got Don joining us today, and Don, I know how busy you are, especially this time of year with the consulting circuit that you've got going on, but thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Joe. Glad to do it.
Yes, sir. And you're in Ohio now?
I'm in a motel room in Ohio. Just visited a property in Maryland over the weekend. Then went to the 360 Blinds dealer event, and now I'm in Ohio. Got to do 3 properties there. Then I'm home for 2 days, and then I'm headed out to Missouri, Kansas, and Iowa for approximately 10, 12 days.
My goodness. Yeah, it's your busy time of the year. So we are flattered we were able to pull you away for about an hour to talk what you love to talk, which is whitetail deer.
Yeah, well, your timing is perfect. I got to this motel room about 30 minutes ago, so
Excellent.
Had some time to kill before supper tonight, so perfect timing.
So on your campaigning trail, are you going to get by Minnesota, Minneapolis anytime soon and maybe open up a learning center or do any picketing or anything like that while you're on your circuit?
Well, I would like to go hunting up there. I don't know about opening any learning centers, but I think we need a new hunting season up that way. And with no bag limits.
No bag limits. That's right. That's exactly right. Oh, we could do a whole podcast on that, couldn't we?
Oh, I'm telling you, get me on politics, and we may go to midnight.
Yeah, that's right. Well, another classic Don Higgins hunting season. And I mentioned before we got started if we could talk about your fourth 200. And most everybody that's listening to this podcast knows who Don Higgins is and has followed along. And your ability to create properties and target specific giant bucks is pretty uncanny in the industry as a whole. I have been personally just blown away just year in and year out of your success on doing exactly what you set out to do. Can you give us a little history and story about your fourth 200 and how that all came to be? Just fascinating. I mean, for somebody to shoot 1 or 2 200s is something, but 4 is pretty darn amazing.
Well, this is a buck that I've been watching since he was 3.5 years old. So I've got and I know there's a lot of people that don't agree that it even works, but I've got a really intensive culling program on my farm. And if I think a buck has potential to be a giant, I'm gonna protect him at all costs. If I don't think he's got potential, he's gonna get shot as a young buck. At 3 years old, I think if they're gonna be a giant most of the time. So if they're 3 years old and they don't show much, they're on the hit list, and the bigger ones get to live until they're 5 and 6. And well, a couple of years back, I had 2 3-year-old bucks that had 6x6 racks. One of them had a little better brow tines than the other, but they looked like twins, and I'm pretty sure they were twins. Just based on my management approach, I shoot a lot of does that have buck fawns, and especially if they got twin buck fawns. And research has shown that if the mother is killed, those bucks are very likely to live out their life where they were born or in close proximity to where they were born. So for that reason, I shoot a lot of does with buck fawns. And I'm pretty sure that these 2 bucks were probably born in close proximity to my farm, and I shot their mother, or their mother got killed. And I mean, they just looked like twins as 3-year-olds. And then as 4-year-olds, they looked even better. They were both probably in the low 180s as 4-year-olds. Passed both of them multiple times, thinking that they made it to 4. There's a good chance that I'm going to get a chance to shoot them both someday. Then last season, one of them came up lame, and I don't know, he hurt his foot or his shoulder or something. I ended up finding one of his shed antlers in my backyard, of all places.
How about that?
I never did find the second one, and he was looking so bad, and he was not hanging out with the rest of the deer herd last winter. I was getting pictures of a lot of deer on my food sources, my soybean food plots and such. But he was a loner. He went off by himself, and that's just a sign of a buck that's hurting. He don't want the other bucks picking on him, and so they kind of hang by themselves. Well, to make a long story short, he didn't survive, or I don't think he did, because he disappeared, and I'm pretty sure he died. The other buck, he put on several inches this past year, and he was right there close to the 200-inch mark. And I actually, I'd look at his trail camera pictures, and I would swear he's 200. Then the next day I'd look at him and I'd swear, oh, he's only like 198 or something. He's a little bit short.
Shame.
Yeah. So I went back and forth, and I was going to shoot him. I wasn't going to shoot him. Well, season rolls around. I decided I'm not going to shoot him. I'm going to focus on a different buck that's not even on my farm, which was also a 5-year-old. But that buck, the only property I had permission to hunt that buck, he just didn't spend much time on. I would just catch a picture at night, like once every 2 weeks or so. And so November rolls around, I decided I'm going to start hunting my farm some and get video footage, because I like to video document the bucks as they're growing up and such, just, for later videos or whatever if I happen to shoot them. So I started hunting my farm there in early November, and it wasn't a couple days in, and this buck comes by. I see him coming one morning towards my stand, and got great video footage of him at 15 yards, feeding under 2 pear trees right in front of me. Got my bow hanging there. Don't even touch the bow. I'm messing with the video camera and getting some fantastic footage of this deer. And as he's walking away, I'm thinking to myself, man, that deer's 200. He's got to be 200. I mean, I've got one on my wall that's 206. Smokey's 206. And I came back and I looked at Smokey, and I thought, that buck's as big as Smokey is. Well, anyway, he walked off that morning, and I thought, if he comes back, I'm going to shoot him. Well, he did come back. It wasn't 15 minutes later. Here he comes back, but he beds down right in front of my stand, like 15 yards in front of me. He beds down, but he's at a bad angle. I can't shoot him laying there. He's got to stand up. Well, I was going to sit there all day, or however long it took him to stand up and present a shot, but probably it wasn't even 10 minutes later, the wind swirled, and he caught my scent. And he didn't know what was going on, but he stood up and he was tense as could be, and he kind of stiff-legged it into the brush. And so that was it for that hunt. I did the direction he went off. The wind switched that day, and that afternoon hunt, I moved to a different stand, and I got some footage of him that afternoon, but he was about, I don't know, 70, 80 yards away in the brush, so not close enough to shoot or anything. But well, then about a week or so later, I'm back in the morning hunt, the same, well, actually it was a blind, 360 hunting blind, where I seen him the first time, and here he comes again. Well, enough time had passed that I talked myself out of shooting him again. So I leave the bow hanging up, and he comes in, he's feeding under these pear trees. I get probably 15 minutes of footage of this deer, and as he's walking off, he goes and he's working his antlers in some branches on this oak tree, probably 25 yards from me, and I'm thinking, that deer has got to be 200 inches. He's got to be. And he walks off, and that's it. Well, and over the next couple of days, 2 of my neighbors text me pictures that they had taken with their cell phones of this buck in their yards in broad daylight.
Oh, my gosh.
So he would have followed a hot doe anywhere, right into somebody's living room.
Sure.
And also, my son-in-law seen him from the road. I seen him from the road, and a third neighbor seen him from the road. So there's 5 times that I know of that people seen him in daylight from the road. And I thought that deer's somebody's going to poach him or something. So I decided the next time that I see him, I'm shooting him if I get a chance. And I don't know. Then on November 12th, our youngest daughter gave birth to our first granddaughter in Indiana. So on the 12th, my wife and I went to Indiana to see the new grandbaby. And we drove separate because my wife stayed over there. And I drove home that evening. And, I got home late and went to bed. And I wasn't planning on getting up and hunting because I got home late and everything. But the next morning, I woke up just without an alarm clock or anything, and in time to go hunting. So I jumped out of bed and I head to the woods and seen a two-year old buck and a year and a half old buck come by, right after daylight. And then I'm looking, and through the brush about 100 yards away, I catch a deer moving, and I throw the binoculars up just in time to see this buck walk into the brush. And I mean, like a half a second, but just long enough to know it was the buck I was after. And he could have went one or two ways, and one way was going to take him away from me, and the other way would take him towards me. And I was just waiting on him to pop out of that brush to see which way he was going to go. And as luck would have it, he's coming right at me. So I got the camera rolling, was basically focused on the camera more than I was the bow or the deer. And anyway, he walks right up there at 10 yards, and he starts rubbing these two giant spruce trees. And I focused the camera on him, grabbed my bow, snapped the release on him, and I shot him right there at 10 yards.
Gosh.
He bounds off a little bit, and I could hear him stumbling in the leaves, but he was kind of hidden behind this tree that had a lot of leaves on it. I kept the camera rolling, then he like stumbles out into view, and I focus on him and get him tumbling over right there, probably 35 yards from my stand, and captured it all on video. And
How about that?
those hunts don't come along very often. When they do, you never forget them.
No, you don't. Well, congratulations, Don. That's again a world class buck, and to me, it all goes back to the effort that you have put into whitetail hunting and habitat development and improvement for not just 1 or 2 years, but basically for a lifetime.
Yeah, so last season was my 48th season of deer hunting, and I learned to hunt basically on public ground. I started hunting public ground, and got some permission properties, but I was young and green. I didn't know what I was doing, and kind of learned that way. And by the time I had acquired a property, I was in my I was about 30 years old. My grandparents passed away, and they had a small farm that I acquired, and that's where I've got today. But I've added a lot of acreage to what they had. But I've made a lot of mistakes on that property to begin with, and I just tried to correct them. And I got it set up today where if a buck shows up and I want to kill him, he's in trouble. Now that doesn't mean that I can go out and shoot him in a week or two. It might take all season, but at some point during the season, I'm probably going to get a shot at any buck I want to on that farm. And it's a special farm, and that's the third 200 I've shot there. But I don't think it's going to be the last. And I think every few years there's going to be one come along. And a big part of that is the management, not only of the farm, but of the deer herd, and culling those bucks really heavy and letting the good ones live. Because I think in most cases, the better bucks get shot in each age class. The better bucks are getting shot at younger ages. So, a guy sitting in his tree stand and out walks two bucks, and they're both 3 years old, but one of them's a 120-inch 8-pointer and the other's a 150-inch 10-pointer. Well, the 150-inch 10 is getting shot every single time.
Every time.
And on my farm, it's just the opposite. That the better bucks in each age class are the ones that are allowed to live to 5, 6 years old. And the ones that don't show the potential, we're shooting them. And I think people get a little bit confused. They think that about culling as it applies to genetics, that you're trying to change the genetics on a property. And without going down that rabbit hole, I'll just say that with what I'm doing, it's got nothing to do with genetics. It works anywhere because you can control which bucks make it to older age classes and which ones don't to some degree by which ones you shoot and which ones you don't shoot.
Sure.
So it'll work to some degree anywhere. I'll be the first to admit that my property lays out exceptionally well. It's like a oasis in a sea of ag. So if a deer leaves my property, he's got to walk across wide open ag fields for a mile or more.
Yeah.
So I don't have wooded cover but right up to my property line where hunters are sitting shooting the deer as soon as he steps across the line. And that really helps. I mean, I'd lose some bucks to other hunters. There's no doubt about it, and that's just part of it. But I don't lose as many, I think, as guys on other properties do.
Sure. Yeah, it is. I've been out there. I came to one of your master classes and got to spend some time out there, and it's unbelievable, the property, and that kind of segues us right into what I wanted to get into here today. Don, is with how many farms would you say you have consulted on or walked over the years? Just a ballpark.
Oh, it's over 500, somewhere 700, somewhere in there.
So I would argue that maybe not the most farms that anybody's ever walked, but you got to be up there towards the top.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some other guys that have walked probably considerably more than me, but I would say there's not many, maybe two or three at the most.
Yeah, yeah. And so with all of that knowledge, experience that you have learned, I've got a list of questions here, Don. If it's all right, I'm just going to start kind of firing them off. When you set foot on a farm for the very first time, like let's say you were coming down here to South Carolina to walk on our farm, what is the first thing you look for on that farm?
Well, where are we going to bed those deer? Because I tell all my clients, if you want to kill big deer consistently, you got to hunt them where they bed.
Okay.
If they're bedding one property over from yours, your odds of killing them are 10% what they are if that buck's bedding on your property. So I'm a fan of big sanctuaries that are totally free of human intrusion. And the first thing I'm looking for is where are we going to put that sanctuary? What part of the property are we going to give to the deer and leave it alone so that we can keep him bedded on that property day after day?
So that's number one when you walk in there. Let's find the sanctuary. Let's set it up, and we got to keep our behinds out of there under any circumstances whatsoever. Stay out of there.
And that's step number one. That's the most important. That's the foundation of the whole property right there.
And Don, having said that, and this is going to be way too general of a question, but let's just look at it from a generality standpoint. How big of a property do you need? I mean, can you do it on 50 acres, or do you need 100? To have that sanctuary where you can hold them.
Well, it depends a lot on what's around that property. So, like an isolated property like mine, you can do it with fewer acres. Um, the more cover that you have touching the property around the border on the neighboring properties, the bigger the property you need. Um, there's no really hard and fast rule on X number of acres. It varies greatly. But the most important thing about a hunting property is not what's on that property, but what's around that property. Because you can change what's on it. If you need bedding cover, you can create bedding cover. If you need food, you can create food. But what you cannot change is what's around it. And you could take a 5-acre property without a single tree on it and kill giants year after year. If that 5 acres sits right against a big no hunting sanctuary and you put food on that 5 acres and maybe surround it, put miscanthus around the edge, you're going to kill big deer year after year after year. So what's around that property is way more important than what's on it.
Yep. That's interesting. Yeah, that's right. So the acres for a guy looking, and that's always, I think, kind of human nature is, man, I got to have 100 acres, or I got to have 500 acres, or I got to have 1,000, and none of that is necessarily true. It's all about what's around you and what that property needs.
Absolutely. I mean, I would much rather have a small property next to a big no hunting sanctuary than a big property.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Would would all right? That's really got my mind spinning. Would you rather have one large property, that you could do a lot of different things on, or would you rather have like multiple small 50, 30, 40 acres like within an hour of your house? What would you prefer?
I would much rather have the multiple smaller properties because each one of those has probably got a different deer herd living on it.
Okay.
So if you had 100 acres or you had 1,000 acres at the same location, you're going to be hunting the same deer herd pretty much. There may be a few bucks that don't make it onto the 100 that were on the 1,000, but when you've got multiple smaller properties, you're hunting a different deer herd on each one, and every time that you add a deer herd, that you just increase your odds of there being a giant in one of those herds.
Yeah. No, that makes good sense. And to spread it out, and then also, I mean, I think with that dreaded three letter word or three legged acronym, whatever you want to call it, EHD, that can help you out too.
Right. Yeah, your odds just really go up on having a giant, the more properties you have access to.
Yeah. What in all your consulting? We talked earlier: Maryland, Ohio, Missouri, Iowa. I mean, you really get all over. What if a guy was looking for potentially a property in big buck country? What state would you look in? What would be your state that you would start?
Right now, I would look at either Kansas or Ohio.
Kansas
I
or
think those
Ohio?
are the two. Iowa's kind of lost some of its luster. I think EHD has really ravaged southern Iowa. But Ohio, I mean, Ohio's just one regulation away from being the top state. If they just get rid of the corn piles, they're number one, hands down. Kansas is really coming on strong too. Those would be my two choices today.
Kansas and Ohio. Yep, nothing wrong with either one of those. They are they are something else. I have spent a lot of time in both, and yeah, Ohio. It is kind of unbelievable. I have spent quite a bit of time up in southern Ohio, and I think southeastern Ohio got hit pretty hard this year with some EHD, but I think the rest of the state fared pretty well. But every 5 to 50 acre woodlot has got a corn pile and a cell cam on that corn pile, and it's super liberal for non-residents. Anybody, Florida, South Carolina, wherever, we can get tags every year over the counter. And man, I think if they did their draw system like Kansas does, where non-residents basically can get in every other year, and they got rid of the corn, that would make it insanely good because they have got some major genetics.
Yeah, they do. And if I had to pick between one of the two today, I would probably pick Kansas. Um, I think I don't know why. I think it doesn't seem to draw as much non-resident attention. Maybe it's because it's farther from the east and people don't want to travel that far. I mean, there's plenty of non-residents that hunt there. Don't get me wrong, but Ohio, it's just there's a lot of people in Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
But man, they've got the genetics. They just kick out some real giants. I don't mean bucks that are just barely 200. I mean bucks that are well into the 200s.
Yeah, I think now this statistic, somebody will definitely fact check me on this, and that's fine. But I think Ohio might have the most 300-inch deer in the record book of any state, and I believe they have a net typical from every single county, if I'm not mistaken. But I think Adam Hayes told me that a couple years ago, is that they have more 300s killed in that state than any state, and a net 170 typical out of every county.
That would not surprise me
Yeah,
at all. So probably correct.
yeah, it's a heck of a spot. All right, let's switch over a little bit from habitat and the sanctuary, and let's talk about feed. A guy gets his let's just call it the oasis of properties, or the ultimate property. He gets him 80 acres, is backed up to a 2,000 acre sanctuary. He finds that it's the mecca of whitetail properties. It's going to have a lot of deer on it. What is your number one food that you're going to plant in there?
Well, my number one food is soybeans, but
Okay.
diversity is really key. And that situation you described, Joe, is one that I think gets mismanaged a lot, where a person has a property right next to a big sanctuary. And I think, just sharing one of my secrets here, not that it's really a secret, but it's one of my tactics, is I think a lot of the guys that have that situation, they want to put that food right up against that sanctuary. Well, a mature buck, a lot of times, he'll just stay in the cover until it's dark, and then he'll come out and feed.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to put the food at the farthest end away from the sanctuary, and then I create bedding cover against the sanctuary. So I want to blur that line, that property line between the true no hunting sanctuary and the sanctuary on the property. I
Yep.
want to blur that line so the buck doesn't recognize that he's just stepped out into the danger zone. And I create a transition zone basically between the food and the no hunting sanctuary, where you can hunt the edges, play in the wind, and catch that buck before he gets to the food or on his way back from the food in the morning to the sanctuary. And putting your food right up against that no hunting sanctuary is a ticket for frustration, really, because you sit there and you get the pictures of the big bucks at night and your food sources. They're right there in that no hunting sanctuary next door, but you can't draw them out in daylight. You got to blur that property line in the eyes of the deer anyway, so that they don't know that they've just stepped across that magical line where they can now be shot. Blur that line in their eyes and force them to go to the other side of the property to feed.
That's a good point. It's because a lot of these no hunting sanctuaries, they don't do a whole lot of like bedding habitat improvement. So it may be just big open hardwoods rolling and rolling and rolling, and the deer are definitely safe in there. But man, just what you said, if you create some real good bedding cover, they may prefer that than the whole sanctuary.
Absolutely. And then you got them bedded on you and they're feeding on you.
Yeah.
Um, just a little tip for anybody that has such a property.
Yeah, for sure. So soybeans number one, followed by what would be your number two?
Well, I like to diversify
Mm-hmm.
as much as possible. So there's, you know, the real world generation 2 soybeans is my favorite. It's got a little higher oil content, doesn't shatter. When the weather gets really bad in late season, those deer are going to be on it, period. They're going to be hitting
Yep.
it. NutriCrave corn, 3 times the fat level, 1.5 times protein level of typical ag corn. They absolutely prefer it. That's another big one. Um, you need some greens: clover, alfalfa, cereal grains, your brassicas. I'm forgiving them a little bit of everything.
Yep.
And fruit trees, apples, pears. I mentioned the 200 I just shot under the pear trees. That buck loved pears. And in fact, I think the deer on my farm like pears better than they do apples. But that buck, the 2 mornings I seen him under the pear trees, he was sniffing out pears. And when the video is released, people will see that. He's under those pear trees eating pears and sniffing out pears in the tall grass under those trees. So if you can provide something on your property that the deer cannot find anywhere else in the neighborhood, um, that they something they like, they're going to be there. And
Mm-hmm.
fruit trees are a great way to do it because my situation, for example, nobody in my neighborhood's got the pear trees, at least to the degree I do. They may have 1 or 2 in their yard or something. Nobody's got persimmon trees. I probably got 100 persimmon trees I planted on my farm. Apple trees. I bet I've got 100 apple trees on my farm. Chestnuts. Anything that you can provide and just stack it up. And the other thing that diversity does is, every one of those food sources is going to have a little bit different nutrient makeup. So, one plant may be high in a certain vitamin, and the next plant is high in a certain mineral or whatever. A deer has the ability to balance his diet provided the plant is there that's high in whatever he's lacking. He'll crave what he's lacking. So, it's no different than, an athlete that's, trying to eat a well balanced diet. He's got his protein and his carbs and all the micronutrients and macronutrients. Yes, and I got onto that because the state of Illinois doesn't allow supplemental feeding where I live. So I've got to do it all through planted food sources in my food plots. And, that diversity just gives a deer every nutrient that he could possibly need to maximize his genetic potential.
That leads me into another question that I had here, Don, was with supplemental feeding. South Carolina, for example, it's a huge feed state, and so is Kansas, so is Ohio. Those are big feed states. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's great. I wish I could do it in Illinois. If I could, I would definitely be doing it every day it was legal to do so. I know some states you can do it year round, others only outside of season. But if I had a property where it could be done, I do own a couple properties in Illinois with a couple partner, or in Ohio with a couple partners, and we've got feed on those farms year round.
And what do you feed, Don? Is there a mixture you really like? Is it something you sell at Real World, or what do you think there?
Yeah, we've got a complete feed that we sell at Real World that it's got the corn and roasted soybeans, but it's also got we call it a concentrate pellet that it's got every vitamin and mineral and nutrient that a deer would need, and you mix that pellet 200 pounds in a ton of feed. So guys that are feeding a lot and need to save some money, they can just buy the pellet and mix it in with their own grain and save some money that way. But you want that deer to have every nutrient he could possibly want or need.
What do you how much we like down here in our swamp, the property that I am so fortunate to hunt, they do a little bit of protein feed, and I want to say the protein that they put out, the raccoons get a lot of it, and the deer do eat some of it. We get pictures of them eating out of the protein feeders, and I want to say it's 18 to 20% protein. What do you think is the recommended amount of protein that they're getting out of supplemental feed? And do you think it really does make a difference with horn development or antler development?
Well, it absolutely does make a difference, but their requirement changes throughout the year. So in the winter, well, actually the fall and winter, they're going to need roughly around 15-16% protein in their complete diet. In the summer or spring and summer, when the fawns are being born and the does are nursing and the bucks are growing their antlers, it's more like 16 to 18% protein. But what you got to realize is that that deer is not only eating what's in that feeder, he's also eating natural food sources. So they will balance their diet to what they need. And if you put out a higher protein feed, like say 20% or 22 or whatever, they will eat less of that and they will balance their diet with more browse or whatever to bring that protein in line with what they really need.
And have you seen properties? I mean, I think that the question, especially the guys here in the swamp ask is, man, am I wasting my money? I'm putting out. I've got 2,000 acres. I'm putting out 5 big 1,000 pound, gravity feeders. They can feed out anytime. I'm putting in this 18 or 20% protein. It's not cheap. Am I gonna in 5 years of doing that? Am I gonna see a difference in the deer herd and in the antler growth?
Well, you got to remember supplemental feed, supplemental minerals is not a quick fix. You don't just put it out in the spring and that summer your bucks magically grow giant antlers. It's a long-term investment. I think you're looking at probably a minimum of 7 years to start seeing real benefit. And the research has shown that. I know Dr. Strickland at Mississippi State Deer Lab has proven it. So fetal programming is a term that we use that describes, what that. I guess Dr. Strickland described it in a very unique way that I think is as good as I've ever heard it. As that fetus is in that fawn, she's got like a switchboard inside her, and she's flipping switches to tell that fetus what kind of environment he's going to be living in. So if she's getting all the nutrition she could possibly want, the best nutrition in the world, she's telling that fawn, "Hey, you're going to be born into the land of milk and honey. You can grow a giant rack to your fullest genetic potential, and you're going to have the resources to do that." On the other hand, if she's stressed nutritionally, she's not getting the nutrition that she really needs. She's telling her fawn that, hey, you're going to get, or you're going to be living in some pretty tough times, and there's going to be some lean days ahead. You're going to have to conserve your antler growth. You're going to have to focus on your body and, the maintenance of your body instead of antlers. And the thing of it is, they've proven it with deer, and they've also proven it with cattle, that once that animal is born, you cannot do anything to change that programming that was done as a fetus. So what's that mean in this conversation is that you start supplemental feeding now, the deer that are really going to be benefiting from that have not even been conceived yet. It'll be the fawns that are conceived this fall. They will be the first generation to fully express their genetic potential because of the nutrition they're getting. So it's a long-term investment, but I feel it's one that's well worth it. And I wish I could do it on my farm.
And mineral, I guess you would say the same. We hammer the maximizer here in South Carolina, and everywhere I go that I'm allowed to put mineral out. I mean, by far. I mean, I can't tell you. I know it was developed out there in the Midwest, but man, the Southern boys that have gotten turned on to this maximizer mineral. I mean, one of my really good buddies, Ryan Bowers, he's got, I think, 5,000 or 6,000 acres on the Wateree River that he can hunt and leases and manages. And the pictures he sends me of his mineral sites are like, it's like you took a backhoe in there and dug it out. I was joking with him. I said, "Man, that's one of your gut pits. That's not a that's not." And he goes, "No, that is." And he comes over every year. We keep a whole bunch of maximizer here at the office, and he comes over every year and gets a full truckload of it and takes it back. But I'm guessing you're going to say mineral too. Is it's all part of the equation?
Yeah, absolutely. And the worse soil that a region has, the more important the mineral supplementation is. If the richer soils in the Midwest, yeah, the deer are going to hit the minerals there too, but not to the degree they will in an area with really poor soils. And the reason for it is plants that are grown in nutrient-rich soils, those nutrients are, you know, pulled up in the plant as it's growing, and then the deer consume them there. But if those plants or those nutrients are missing in the soil, well, that plant is missing those nutrients as well, so the deer never get it, and that they'll just crave those minerals that they can't find in their diet.
Yeah. It leads me to another thing I was talking to some guys about. There's a older gentleman here that's got again, South Carolina, that's got a big track. I think it's also in that 4 to 5,000 acres. And you got to remember, Don, our land is just all big cutovers and swamp bottom. It's not like great big ag country. And he does a limited amount of food plots. He does a little supplemental feeding. He does a little bit of mineral, but his big deal is maximizing native habitat, like with burning and a lot of the native stuff that he has, in his area, almost like he's managing for quail and turkey with his burning and all of that. I don't know what else, roller chopping or whatever else he does, so that he gets a ton of I guess native browse. What are your thoughts on that as far as health for the deer and that sort of thing?
Well, I think that's very important as well. I mean, if I had to give up one or the other, I would give up the supplemental feed before I would give up the browse. But I think both have their place, and when you combine the two, I mean, you're maximizing the nutrition that those deer have. And a deer is not going to just stick his head in a feeder and eat nothing else. I don't care what's there, even if it's old dried up leaves from the fall before. He's going to eat other things besides what's in that feeder. So if you've got good browse along with a good supplemental feed, you've got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, and so what I'm gathering is there's not a one shoe fits all. What you need to do is first and foremost sanctuary, sanctuary, sanctuary. Secondly, as much diversity in food, whether it be maintaining the browse, supplemental feeding if you can, mineral program if you can, and then a buffet of food throughout the year, fruit trees, soybeans, corn, the whole shebang. And that's the recipe. That's the real recipe. It's not just go in and drop out 2,000-pound gravity feeders with protein in it and forget about it. That ain't gonna do it. You gotta cross the board.
Absolutely. And if supplemental feeding were to become legal in my state, I would still be doing absolutely everything I'm doing now. I would just add supplemental feeding to the mix.
No, that makes good sense, and that's eye opening because unfortunately right now I don't own a property. You know, I'm looking into it. I have owned some in South Carolina and Kansas, and even in Ohio, but I'm looking to get another one locally at home. And I was thinking, yeah, if I could just go in there and just look around and see what I can do different from the neighbor, which is important, and that'll be getting out some supplemental feed. That should be enough, and that won't be enough. I've got to really look at it from a 1,000-foot view and get all of the above going.
Yeah, and you can even take it further, and you can enhance your soil in your food plots with. Well, I'll just throw out a couple things for the listener to research a little further after the podcast. But biochar is a product. It's basically what makes the rainforest so fertile. Um, but you add biochar to the soil, work it into the first several inches, and it's little particles almost kind of looks like coal or charcoal almost. And it'll absorb whatever nutrients are in the soil. So let's say you fertilize with, triple 12. The NPK, the nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, is will absorb or adhere to those little particles of biochar instead of leaching away in the soil with the rain or whatever. And that biochar will hold those particles at the level where the plant's roots will utilize it. Humic acid is another one that'll do the same thing. And I have just I poured those two products to my food plots. The biochar is you apply it once at a rate of about 1,000 pounds an acre. So I put 2,000 pounds an acre on all my plots.
Imagine that.
And then humic is something that you'll put about 200 to 300 pounds about every 2 to 3 years. And, I maximize that as well. But the difference that I've seen, I started doing that about 3 years ago, but the difference in the plants on my farm, on my plots now is just incredible. I mean, my soybeans will be shoulder high and
Wow.
just loaded with pods. And the deer will, like my clover, they'll just decimate that clover down to the dirt like they never did in the past. I mean, they ate it in the past, but not like they do now. And soil pH is critical. But if I lived in an area like you where the soils aren't the greatest, I would be making as big a plots as you could, and I would be enhancing that soil as much as you could because that nutrient-rich soil produces nutrient-rich plants, and the deer can definitely tell the difference, and they will definitely prefer to feed on those nutrient-rich plants. And you can make your food plot, you could be planting the same thing your neighbor's planting, whether it be corn, soybeans, clover, whatever. You guys could have the very same seed out of the same bag, but the soil that it's grown in can make a huge difference on the palatability and the attraction, but more importantly, the nutrients that those deer get out of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that's a good tip. Biochar and what was the other one, Don?
Humic acid.
I'm writing this down. Humic.
You can do a search on biochar, and I mean, it is eye-opening how the Aztecs in the rainforest created these pockets of really rich soil by they would clear the forest and they would burn these trees. Biochar is made by burning like wood products in a low oxygen environment. And so yeah, I mean, it looks like charred wood, almost like charcoal, but it stays in the soil for 1,000 years or more. It
Good
doesn't break
gracious.
down. Yeah,
Wow.
you do it once and it's there.
How about that? Yeah, that's what we need to do. I kind of hope nobody in South Carolina listens to this.
At least your neighbors.
From a selfish perspective, I'm glad
Yeah,
to
at
hear
least your
this.
neighbors.
Yeah,
But
especially any neighbors. That's right. You know, it's we do so many podcasts, Don, as you know, focusing on the rut. And you know, Bobby, through you, has become a good buddy of mine, and I know he's a good buddy of yours, and a wealth of knowledge. And his major tactic is rut hunting, right? That's his big thing: how to dissect the rut, do the rut. And that is super important, right? To know how to hunt that rut, especially on properties, big wood properties where you might not can manage and all that. How to dissect the rut, which does line up with a lot of ways guys have to hunt, right? They have to do that. But the rut is such a small part of the season. You know, you get that pre-rut, and then you get the rut, and then you get a little bit of kind of the tail end, or we'll call it the post-rut, which is such a small part of the season and vitally important, because that's a lot of times that, you know, in those big woods areas, that's a lot of times the only times those bigger deer are going to daylight. But the food side of it and management side of it, that is a much larger part of the season, right? When those deer are coming to feed and their own, we'll call them a pattern, you know, where they're bed to food, because that's pretty much their natural course of action outside of the rut. I mean, would you agree with all of that?
oh, absolutely. You know, when it comes to hunting the rut, Bobby's as good as anybody on the planet, and he's got that down to a science. I do think that in some of those situations, those big wood situations, hill country, mountains, whatever you want to call them, where food plots are not really an option or whatever. If I was stuck hunting a situation like that, and especially if I owned the property, but even if I didn't, I'll tell you what I would be doing. I'd be going into some of those clearing areas where there's some sunlight hitting the ground, and I'd be planting some pear trees and some persimmon trees, and I'd be creating these hidden honey holes in these mountainous areas. And even if you got to go in for the first few years and keep the brush cleared back and get those trees off to a good start, it's not something that you're going to benefit from the first year or two or three, but you know, a decade down the road, that's going to be an absolute hot spot. And I think it's just a tactic that some of these big woods hunters should employ. I think it would really up their success.
Yeah, food. That's right, and that is the bulk of the bulk of the season is that bedding cover to food, bedding cover to food, and if you can hunt the in between, you know, you get a lot of cracks at them. You know, a lot of times if you're right on the X on the food, that can sometimes be a one and done thing. You know, on a big mature deer, if you know you're climbing down in the afternoon or whatever it may be, and you don't have the farm set up where you can have great access in and out. So I think that's something that we as a Mission Whitetail podcast need to probably focus a little more on in 2026 is the bed to food, because that's such a big part of the whitetail season.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I killed my buck during the rut this year, but I kill more of them in the late or the early season in October than I ever do in the rut. And I even kill a bunch in the late season when they're on that feeding pattern. In fact, there was a period of time a few years back where 5 bucks in a row that I shot were all shot after Christmas. And you know, in different years, but all five in a row were shot after Christmas in the late season. And it was back, you know, 15 years ago when we was getting some bad winters and such, and those deer would get on those food sources, and you knew that every afternoon they were coming. You just had to be real careful not to bump those deer, and you know, pick your hunts carefully. Don't go just every day just because. Make sure you had the wind and the access, and then get in there. And the odds of at least seeing them are fantastic, and really good at killing them too.
Yep. All right, I got two more questions. Well, actually, I've got one more question for you, Don, and then I'll let you go. Would you rather have a farm that was really close to you, like within 30, 45 minutes, that was in an okay whitetail genetic area that you could visit, and do improvements and work on when you needed to? Or would you rather, let's just use me for an example. I can get to, this is going to have to be a little bit hypothetical. I could get to Western Kentucky, for example, which is pretty good hunting, in 7 hours. But I can get to Kansas, which is one of the meccas, but it's a 17-hour drive. It's not that's a destination that I'm going to have to go to and spend some time and come home. So I guess my question, you know right where I'm going with this. Would you rather have a farm that's a little closer to you that you can get to and from much easier, or would you rather go to the absolute mecca of whitetail genetics and it's just going to be a lot more difficult for you to get out there and do some of the improvements you need to do?
Well, I would definitely take the property closer to home.
Okay.
And the older I get, the more I like sleeping in my own bed. But also, a property closer to home, you're going to get to spend more time on it. I mean, I don't care who you are. If it's the closer to home it is, the more time you're going to get to spend there. And I think that, my farm's a perfect example. When I started years ago, it was nothing special whatsoever. Lots of 8-point genetics. Yeah, the typical biggest buck I would have on my farm year after year would be about 150 inches. That was the biggest, and there'd be one of those. And about every 3 or 4 years, I'd get one a little bit bigger, maybe a 170. But then it'd be back to 3 or 4 years of a 150. And over time, it's unbelievable the change. So this year, of all the bucks I had that were 3.5 years and older, all of them, there was one 8-pointer. And that's the one I shot and posted on my social media here, I don't know, 3 weeks or so ago. That was the only buck 3 years and older that was an 8-pointer. All the rest of them have at least 10 points.
How about that?
And that's just, and it didn't happen overnight, though. I mean, we're talking 20, 25 years of trying to shoot every stinking 8-pointer. Every buck that was still an 8-pointer at 3, we tried to shoot them and still do. Now, next year, I may have 3 of them, but I can see the progress year after year. And so to get back to your question, I think you can take a property that maybe is not in the greatest area, and over time, I think you can improve the size of the bucks that are there. And there's a lot of variables. You can't have neighbors sitting your fence and the bucks you let walk, they're going to shoot them. That don't work. But if you've got a property where you can keep some bucks alive, even if you can keep half of the bucks you want alive and move them on to the older age classes, that's a huge step. But I think having that property close to home, I mean, I've got 2 properties in Ohio and I've never hunted either one of them. I'm not going over there unless there's an absolute giant. I'll sleep in my own bed at home,
Yeah.
and I can shoot 170s at home all day long. Why would I want to drive to Ohio to shoot one?
For sure.
Now, if a 200 shows up over there, I may take up residence in Ohio, but until that happens, but I just think for most of us, having a property close to home, the benefits and the use we're going to get out of that property far outweigh the negative of having to deal with maybe not quite as good a deer herd.
Sure. Perfect. Don, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you taking the time this afternoon to hop on here and answer questions you've been asked. I know a million different times. We probably didn't hit on anything unique that you have not been asked before, but it's so good to keep passing your knowledge on, and just greatly humbled and appreciative for you to give us a chance to come on here today.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe. I look forward to seeing you guys in Shipshawana. I know you're going to be at that show here in about a month, and always good to catch up with you. And
yes, sir. I think we're having a pastry testing contest, or maybe a pie testing contest. So I'm greatly looking forward to that.
Yeah, you're going to be one of the judges too?
I believe so. Yeah, I brought that stuff up last year about Rise and Roll Bakery, and the next morning I had about 15 different donuts and desserts in our booth. So I'm a little bit nervous about what's going to happen.
I'll tell you what, the Amish got word that I like cherry pies, and when I go on these consulting visits, you'd be shocked at how many cherry pies I have waiting on me.
That's great.
I love it.
Yeah, I know. I'm going to have to do like a 3-day fast before and after the Shipshewana show. No question about it.
Well, I'm going to be burping cherry pies for about a week after that show.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to it, Don. Thank you again. And, guys, we appreciate you following along. And if you like this one and you want to hear more from Don, please go to his podcast, Chasing Giants. It's one of the best ones by far on whitetail deer hunting. Guys, we appreciate it.